But Change or Die is the conference, and the whole theme around that, I wanted to suggest to you, and you can see this on the opening slide, engaging the God who makes all things new. And I want to speak to you today out of the context of not so much what I've learned from a book. I want to speak to you today out of the context of not so much what I've learned in theory, but I want to speak to you today out of the context of learning from life, learning from the good encouragement and counsel of brothers and friends, and out of circumstances that sometimes surprise you. But one of the things that I've often said is that change just happens. Change happens. But one of the things that makes it come alive in a different way is when it happens to you. So I want to speak to you today out of the last 14 months of my life, which is, for me at least, the change that was a surprise is a vocational change, moving from a place of termination into a new place of service to our Lord. There's some great things that happen, some great things to be learned in the context of that. And what I learned first and foremost, and it's a good place for me to start, and I invite you into that journey with me this afternoon, is to say, when your life changes immediately and radically, and the news is by surprise, and you've heard other speakers say that change is first perceived as loss, and so there is that sense of something here has been lost. What does that mean in terms of, I guess the way to ask the question is, what is God doing in the midst of this? Where is God in the midst of what's going on in your life? And I want to invite you into what was for me a long night of thinking and prayer and reflection, and for my wife and me kind of absorbing news, and for my family and me absorbing some news. And when the lights are out and the sound is still and quiet, and you're asking yourself, what does faith mean in the midst of change? I have to tell you that the place where my mind went was to one single spot in the Scriptures. And it's to this spot in Revelation 21, verse 5. He who is seated on the throne said what? I am making everything new. And so in the midst of going through change, in the midst of trying to understand circumstance, you also want to touch the transcendent part of change. You want to trust and you want to touch the place where there is consistency in the midst of change. You know, in Texas, from time to time, we have hurricanes that hit the Gulf Coast. And sometimes they come in, they're called squalls. Sometimes they're rated as number 1 category, kind of a hurricane. And what that tends to tell you is that you've got an angry rainstorm with a poorly defined center. But the ones that come in hard, the ones that come in with great damage, that take the lives of people and animals and absolutely redefine what life is like, have an incredibly well-defined center. So one of the things I want to say to you out of my own experience in life and dealing with change is to just ask you how your center's doing in the midst of all of these things. And what I needed that first night after I entered into this particular change was a well-defined center. And I understand something about that not being exegetically correct necessarily. I understand that the words that are right there from Revelation 21, verse 5, really weren't speaking to the issue of a Steve Wagner circumstance and change. But I had to believe that somewhere the consistent place and the truth of that word that transcended its own circumstance was found in the DNA of God. I am. See, I know that's His name. Making. There's something proactive in all of that. All things new. And so we began this journey that has, for me at least, has taken into some new directions, new things. But one of the important things that has happened to me in this season of change is to fall in love with God in a new way. And it's to fall in love with the one who is making all things new. The one who gives you a moment and privilege and opportunity in life to set down an awful lot of heavy weight. If you're like me, you have a tendency to take on heavy weights, carry a lot of stuff. And there was something refreshing. There was something wonderful about engaging something that was changing and something new. And in the context of this, when you understand circumstances of change, you've already heard people talking today about incremental change. That's just taking little bitty steps to try to keep up with the great big stuff that's happening around you. But discontinuous change is either a circumstance that is so severe, so challenging that it could destroy you, or it's an opportunity that is so large and so compelling that it should not be resisted. And it isn't a discontinuous change that I want to speak today, because that's where my journey has been, into discontinuous change. And hear me give you that definition one more time. Discontinuous change is a way of saying that something is so large and so threatening that it could destroy you, or the opportunity is so great that it is compelling and should not be resisted. In the course of conversation, as we began our transition journey, there was a gentleman that said to me, "Steve, things like this happen because sometimes things change." Now, here's what I've come to understand about that statement in life. It is both true and false. Discontinuous change is not an everyday kind of an event. It's not something that you come across every day. But change, as a dynamic, is simply a part of life. And not sometimes things change. Things are always changing. Things are always moving. And it seems to me, as a pastor, as a former executive of an organization that trained pastors, now as a pastor again in a congregation and working as a mentor and a coach with pastors all around the country, it seems to me that to resist change, to deny change, to pull back from change is to adopt a position of irrelevant and victim at the same time. Incrementalist change is sort of survivalist change, but discontinuous change, which when you think about the heart of the gospel, as Paul Kelm so beautifully spoke to us today, and it speaks to change, to me, that transformational stuff is discontinuous. Always. Always. Two things that I've learned about change along the way. One is that it's inevitable. We've talked about that. And the second is that it's irreversible. So if you take those two realities, those two truths, and you begin to understand in my life, whether I'm called as a pastor or I'm a leader in a congregation, an executive in a business or something of that nature, I'm a teacher, I'm a butcher, baker, candlestick maker, whatever it may be, a part of who I am and what I do has to do with influencing change and understanding that. There's three things that you want to understand about influencing change. Number one, I cannot change the past. To immediately move into the past, that may be a way in which our our operating system, the iOS of who I am as a human being, may take me to that place, but in terms of productive, positive, forward movement, I cannot change the past. Here's something that became shockingly clear to me. I really cannot change the present. You and I are here. And there's not much that we can do to change what's going on right in this moment. But here's the truth, and this is what is important. I can change the future. I can change the future. That truth is profound enough that a fellow by the name of Peter Drucker said this, because people ask me from time to time, they say, well, what does the future look like at the church where you're serving? What does the future look like at Pastor 360? What does the future look like for you and your family? And here's how Peter Drucker would answer that question. The best way to predict the future is to create it. The best way to predict the future is to create the future. And so one of the things that I want to do today as we are speaking, and we've got just a few minutes left, I want to say two things about that. Number one, I want to talk about leadership as critical to this business of creating the future. And then the second, the closing thing, is just to come to a couple of places where in my own journey from the darkness of night to sort of a rebirth of life and service within our church are some things that I've learned. Number one, leadership in the context of change. Let's give this definition to the leadership. Leadership is an action or a process of producing effect. Isn't that an interesting definition? It is an action or process producing effect. In other words, when we're talking about the future, when we're talking about change, when we're talking about leadership, we're not just window shopping. We're not just wishing and hoping. A significant part of leadership is leadership spent imagining, leadership spent on the horizon, looking beyond the horizon. It's trying to consider what it means, not just to think about today, but to think about next week, next month, next year, next decade. And as my friend Lynn Sweet, the last time that I was with him, asked me, he said, Steve, what are you doing as someone who has influence with pastors to prepare them for the 22nd century? And I said, I'm not even sure I'm ready for the 22nd of the month. He said, don't you understand that people who are being born today, many of them will still be alive for the next Y2K event, 22nd century? How much time you given to the 22nd century? I said, Lynn, until this very moment, 0. I want to introduce something to you that I've come to learn along the way, some things about visioning and imagining and this whole business of moving toward the future. And I want to call it being a servant visionary. We're familiar with the language of servant leadership, the Robert Greenleaf kind of stuff. But I think there's a notion that's sometimes mistaken that the whole business, the visionary is the leader. The one who is going to craft our future is that particular woman or that particular man. And what I want to suggest to you is that there are some other ways to think about this. First of all is how will we make the world into a better place for others? When we're thinking about the future, when we're imagining visionary people, talking about how does this place become better for others. One of the things that I see happen in business, and I see it happen too often in the church, is that we imagine a future that is better for us. Come on. We imagine a future that is better for us. What I believe is the place where God's Spirit is most vibrant and alive is in the imagining of how the future becomes a better place for others. And some of those others haven't even come on the scene just yet. And second, the vision itself is always about people, not deliverables. What will this mean for us? How will this better prepare us to serve others? How does this become a tool for the gospel? How does this serve the cause of Jesus Christ? How does this advance His kingdom? And that's a part of what it means to create that future. I wanted to share something with you. It's a quote from a magazine article entitled "Making Dreams Matter." And it goes to this, and I think it's the business of the servant visionary. Igniting passion is always about their dream, not yours. Leaders are matches. Fire and heat come from others. Isn't that interesting? It's process. It's people. It's dreaming together. It's one of the one another pieces of Scripture that come alive in a great way in the church. And so when we move into that place of imagining what this new beginning is, and imagining what life is like on the other side of some sort of discontinuous change, imagining how this new future is a blessing and benefit to others. A great quote here: leaders live with the future in mind by acting like tomorrow is today. Acting like tomorrow is today. One of my favorite phrases for leaders, and when when people ask me this, so what's your mission in life? How do you define your own future? One of the things I like to talk about is this. I say, here's my mission in life: carpe manana. Seize tomorrow. Seize tomorrow. And what I want to share with you here in closing are just 5 behaviors that will move you in that direction. Number 1 is to simply identify and gain constituents. In other words, whatever the future is that God is showing to you as a leader, whatever the future is on the other side of the change, that it's socialized and it's talked about, prayed over by friends and people together as we move together. And one of the things that I would always do when I was thinking about this as a leader in a congregation, I would be looking for people that I would call centers of influence, because they help expand the dream. If I know 5, they know 5, and so we're talking about the dream, we're praying about the dream, we're considering the dream, and that's passed on to those 5 who know 5 more, and we press that out as far as it can go. Identify and gain constituents. Secondly is think like a dreamer, but talk like a doer. The people who will fund your dream will require that of you. The people who will follow you even to death will require that of you. Think like a dreamer, but talk like a doer. This is, I wanted to show you this picture. Organizations that ignore dreamers die. Number 3 is learn from detractors. Never keep the people who disagree with the dream away from the dream or the dreamer. You can learn an awful lot about the people who don't agree with the idea just right out of the gate. And we want to embrace those who might be detractors and learn from them. Number 4, develop people and grow teams. Develop people and grow teams. Years ago, I heard John Maxwell say something that it takes it takes a team to achieve a dream. And I thought that's a terrific thing, but as I began to press into that more, as I began to experience this whole business of visioning and forward casting and dealing with change all around me at a greater level, one of the things that I began to discover is that if it doesn't take a dream to make a team to make the dream come true, the dream isn't big enough. Abandon the dream. It's not big enough. And number 5, listen, listen, listen. You can learn from every person. You can learn from every conversation. Listen, listen, listen. And when you've never gone through moments of discontinuous change, it's important to listen to those who have and survived. And survived. They have something to tell you. I know. So let me share with you 3 things. As someone who's been on a bit of a journey, I would say to you that one of the things I delight with my wife is to share this space with her. Number one, for all that is past, give thanks. Give thanks. And everything give thanks, says the Apostle Paul, for this is the will of God concerning you in Christ Jesus. Learn to give thanks. Number two, for all that is present, yes, for all that is present in Jesus Christ. One of the things that is always existential, that is always immediate, is His invitation, which is the most frequently extended in the New Testament, to follow me. Press hard into that invitation. Keep that invitation keenly in front of you. And as Jesus speaks that, by His grace, say yes. And finally, for all that will be, the word is wow. For God tells us that He can do far more than we can ask or imagine. So dream big dreams. Hold them lightly in terms of owning them yourself, but own them tenaciously in faithfulness to the God that you know and love and serve. Thank you for the privilege of speaking to you today. God bless you.